The Wyoming wind carried secrets. Eleanor Blackwood felt it in her bones as she hung wet laundry on the line behind their modest farmhouse. Each gust whispered through the cottonwoods, rustling the leaves like old paper. She paused clothespin between her teeth and watched the horizon where purple mountains met an endless sky. 42 years old, lines around her eyes from squinting against prairie sun, hands calloused from honest work. No one would look at her and see death. That was the point. "Ellie," Marcus called from the barn. "Come see this." She smiled despite herself. 5 years of marriage and his voice still made her heart skip. She finished pinning his work shirt to the line and walked across the yard, boots crunching on late autumn grass. Marcus stood beside their old mare Constance, running his hand along her swollen belly. His Confederate gray eyes crinkled with joy. "She's close," he said. "Maybe tonight." Eleanor touched the horse's neck. Warm, strong. Life growing inside, waiting to burst into the world. So different from the last thing she'd brought into being. "You remember how to deliver a foal?" she asked. "Been a while." Marcus straightened, wincing slightly. The old wound in his left shoulder always ached when weather changed. "But I delivered you from that life, didn't I?" She kissed his bearded cheek. "That you did." They walked back toward the house together, his arm around her waist. The setting sun painted everything gold and amber. Their small world. Their peace. If only she'd known it was the last sunset they'd share. That evening, Eleanor prepared Marcus's favorite meal. Venison stew with wild onions. Cornbread baked in the iron Dutch oven. Coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Marcus sat at their small table cleaning his rifle. Not because he expected trouble. Old habits. A man who'd survived Shiloh and Antietam never completely set aside his weapons. "Thomas wrote again," he said, not looking up from the gun barrel. Eleanor's hands stilled on the butter churn. "What did he want this time?" "Same as always. Money. Says he's got a sure thing. Some job that'll set us all up for life." Thomas Blackwood, Marcus's twin brother, a name that always left a bitter taste in Eleanor's mouth. She'd met him exactly once at their wedding. Same face as Marcus, but the eyes were different. Hungry, cold. "You told him no." "Of course." Marcus set down his cleaning rod. "Ellie, you know I'm done with all that. The war, the stealing, the killing. I just want to buy our land in Oregon and raise horses." She nodded, but unease crawled up her spine like a spider. "What kind of job?" "Union Pacific's running gold shipments through Devil's Canyon. Thomas thinks we could take one. Just like old times." Marcus's voice carried disgust. "I told him I'd rather die poor than live rich off stolen gold." Eleanor turned back to the churn, working the handle harder than necessary. The Phantom Lady would have seen the trap immediately, would have known that desperation makes men stupid, makes them trust the wrong people. But Eleanor Blackwood was just a farmer's wife. She churned butter and worried about horses giving birth. "He won't come here, will he?" "No." Marcus's voice was firm. "I made it clear. We're done with him." Outside, wind howled through the canyon walls. Eleanor shivered, though the fire burned bright and warm. She should have listened to the wind. Eleanor woke before dawn, as she always did. Marcus still slept beside her, breathing deep and steady. She studied his face in the gray light filtering through their small window. Laugh lines, worry lines, scars from Chancellorsville and Fredericksburg. She'd memorized every detail without knowing why. Coffee first, then eggs from their small flock of hens. Marcus would want to check on Constance before riding out to the north pasture. Their bull had broken through the fence again, and the neighbors' cattle were mixing with theirs. Simple problems. Simple solutions. Marcus stirred as she dressed. "Too early, love." Constance might have foaled. He sat up, instantly alert. War had taught him to wake quickly. "I'll come with you." They walked to the barn together, breath steaming in the cold air. Constance stood in her stall, very much still pregnant. She whickered softly at their approach. "Not today, girl," Marcus murmured, offering her a handful of oats. "But soon." Eleanor leaned against the stall door and watched her husband. Strong hands, gentle with animals, patient, kind. Everything the Phantom Lady had never deserved. "I'll be back by supper," he said, saddling his gelding. "That bull won't drive himself home." "Be careful." He kissed her forehead. Always am. She watched him ride north until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she went back to the house and tried to ignore the feeling that something was ending. Eleanor was mending Marcus's spare shirt when the shots echoed across the valley. 3 quick cracks from the north pasture, then silence. She set down her needle and thread. Listened. Wind in the trees, Constance neighing nervously in the barn. Nothing else. Marcus always carried his rifle when checking the cattle. Mountain lions still prowled these hills. But 3 shots meant trouble. She retrieved her old Colt Navy from the wooden box beneath their bed. Checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. Muscle memory guided her hands as she loaded it properly, though she hadn't drawn the weapon in 5 years. The Phantom Lady's gun felt heavier than she remembered. Eleanor saddled their second horse and rode north following Marcus's trail. The sun climbed higher, but shadows seemed to deepen in the canyon ahead. She urged the horse faster. She found the bull first, grazing peacefully near the broken fence, completely untroubled by whatever had caused the shooting. No dead mountain lion, no obvious threat, but no Marcus either. "Marcus!" Her voice echoed off canyon walls. "Marcus!" Only wind answered. She followed the creek downstream, scanning the ground for tracks. Found them near a bend where cottonwoods clustered thick. Boot prints in the mud. Multiple sets. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The Phantom Lady read signs like scripture. 5 men on horseback had waited here. Waited for Marcus. They'd known he'd come this way. "Marcus," she called again. This time silence felt different. Heavier, final. Eleanor found him face down in the shallow water where the creek pooled below a small waterfall. Red ribbons streamed from his body, painting the clear water dark. She dismounted and waded in, not caring about her dress or boots. Turned him over. His gray eyes stared at nothing. 17 stab wounds. She counted them automatically, the way she'd once cataloged damage to enemy soldiers. Quick, efficient cuts. Someone had taken time, enjoyed the work. Blood had pooled on the stone beside the creek, forming an almost perfect circle. Ritual, display, message. Marcus's right hand was clenched tight around something. Eleanor pried his fingers open and found a crumpled letter. Her hands shook as she unfolded the bloodstained paper. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I cannot live with the lies anymore. Eleanor believes I am the man who saved her from that life. But the truth is, I have been planning to leave her for months. I love you more than I have ever loved anything, and if she knew I was still alive, I don't know what Ellie would do. She was called the Phantom Lady during the war. She killed 37 men that I know of, maybe more. I pray this letter never reaches you, but if it does, take the money hidden in the tin box beneath our bed and run. Go somewhere she can never find you. She is not the woman I married. She is something else. Something dangerous. Wait for me in Silver Creek. I will come to you after I tell her the truth. All my love, Marcus." The letter slipped from Eleanor's numb fingers and landed in the bloody water. She watched ink dissolve, words bleeding away like everything else. Carved into Marcus's chest, just above his heart, someone had scratched a message. "This is what happens to traitors." Eleanor knelt in the creek beside her husband's body and wept. Not for Marcus, the loving husband. That man had never existed. She cried for Eleanor the fool, Eleanor the naive, Eleanor who'd believed she could bury the Phantom Lady forever. When no more tears would come, she dragged Marcus's body to shore and began the grim work of preparing him for burial. As she washed blood from his wounds, she noticed something else. Under his fingernails, black dirt and pieces of blue fabric. Marcus had fought back, marked his killers. The Phantom Lady smiled for the first time in 5 years. Eleanor spent 3 days digging Marcus's grave on the hill overlooking their small ranch. She could have asked the neighbors for help, but this was private, personal. She buried him with his rifle, and the letter meant for Clara. Let the dead keep their secrets. On the 4th day, she rode into town. Millbrook consisted of 1 main street, a dozen buildings, and more churches than saloons. Respectable people living respectable lives. The kind of place where a war widow could disappear and become just another face in the crowd. Eleanor hitched her horse outside Murphy's General Store and stepped into the dim interior. Jeremiah Murphy looked up from his ledger and smiled. "Mrs. Blackwood, haven't seen you in a spell." How's Marcus? Dead. Murphy's smile died. What happened? Mountain lion. The lie came easily. Mauled him pretty bad. Good Lord, I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Is there anything? I need supplies. She placed a list on his counter. Ammunition, rope, a new skinning knife. Murphy studied the list, frowning. This is enough supplies for a hunting expedition. That's exactly what it is. His eyes met hers, and something in her expression made him step back involuntarily. For just a moment, Eleanor Blackwood's mask had slipped. He'd glimpsed what lived underneath. I'll gather these items. Eleanor waited, drumming her fingers on the counter. Through the window, she watched ordinary people living ordinary lives. A woman pushing a baby carriage, two men discussing the weather, children playing in the street. None of them had blood on their hands. None of them had loved a lie. None of them understood that some hunts required more than ordinary tools. Here you are. Shirisha Murphy set a heavy canvas bag on the counter. That'll be $18. Eleanor counted out the money. Real money earned from selling cattle and crops. Honest money. She wondered if she'd ever see honest money again. Mrs. Blackwood, Murphy's voice was hesitant. If you need anything else, help with the ranch or... I won't be ranching anymore. She shouldered the supplies and walked out without another word. Behind her, Murphy crossed himself and began to pray. Smart man. Back at the ranch, Eleanor transformed her small home into something else entirely. She moved furniture aside and spread Marcus's old war maps across the floor. Wyoming Territory, Colorado, Utah, places where desperate men ran when civilization got too close. From memory, she sketched faces on scraps of paper. 5 men, the ones who'd waited by the creek. Thomas Blackwood, the twin brother with hungry eyes. He'd organized this. She was certain. Jeremiah Blackjack Murphy. No relation to the storekeeper. A gunfighter with a reputation for knife work. The 17 wounds made sense now. Dutch Cassidy, explosives expert, used to blow Union supply trains during the war. Razor Eddie Kowalski, former Union deserter turned outlaw. Lost 2 fingers on his left hand to frostbite during the retreat from Richmond. Samuel Iron Sam Morrison, the enforcer, built like a bear, twice as mean. 5 men who thought they could kill Marcus Blackwood and walk away. Who thought Eleanor was just a grieving widow with no recourse but tears and prayers. They'd forgotten the most important rule of warfare: never leave enemies alive. Eleanor opened the wooden box beneath her bed and lifted out the tools of her former trade. The Colt Navy cleaned and oiled, a derringer for close work, a knife with a 7-inch blade sharp enough to shave with. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay her greatest treasure, the Phantom Lady's Journal. 5 years of war condensed into leather-bound pages. Names, faces, methods, 37 confirmed kills, and the techniques used to achieve them. She'd thought those days were over. She'd thought Eleanor Blackwood could bury the Phantom Lady forever. But Marcus's blood had awakened something that could never truly die. Blackjack Murphy frequented a saloon called the Broken Wheel in Cedar Falls, 2 days' ride northeast. Eleanor had learned this from careful questioning in Millbrook. Murphy was known to boast about his knife work when drunk. Bad habit. Fatal habit. Eleanor arrived in Cedar Falls as the sun set behind the mountains. She'd traded her farmer's dress for men's clothing, dark trousers, a heavy coat, boots, suitable for rough travel. Her hair was pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat. To casual observers, she looked like a traveling merchant, or perhaps a widow selling her late husband's goods. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Perfect. The Broken Wheel squatted at the end of Cedar Falls Main Street like a festering wound. Yellow light spilled from its windows, accompanied by raucous laughter and off-key piano music. Eleanor tied her horse behind the building and slipped through the back door. The kitchen was empty except for an old Chinese cook who barely glanced at her. She nodded politely and continued into the main saloon. Smoke hung thick as wool. 20 men, maybe more, clustered around tables, playing cards or dice. Working girls circulated with drinks and false smiles. In the corner, a piano player pounded out melancholy tunes. Eleanor bought whiskey at the bar and found a seat where she could watch the room. She didn't have to wait long. Blackjack Murphy sat near the back, regaling 3 younger men with stories of his exploits. Even at a distance, Eleanor could see the dried blood beneath his fingernails. Marcus's blood. Stuck him like a pig, Murphy was saying. 17 times neat as you please. Man squealed like... Eleanor's hand tightened on her whiskey glass. She forced herself to remain still, patient. The Phantom Lady had always been patient. Murphy drank steadily for 2 hours. His audience gradually lost interest and drifted away. By 10 o'clock, he sat alone, swaying slightly in his chair. Eleanor rose and walked to his table. Mind if I sit? Murphy looked up with bleary eyes. Free country, I think. She sat across from him and studied his face. Weak chin, small, cruel eyes, soft hands despite his reputation. This was the man who'd carved up Marcus. You're Jeremiah Murphy. Guilty as charged, he grinned, revealing broken teeth. And you are. Someone who heard about your recent work near Millbrook. Murphy's expression sharpened slightly. Some instinct warning him perhaps, but greed and alcohol overruled caution. What about it? I might have similar work, if you're interested. Depends on the pay. Eleanor leaned forward. How about you finish your drink and we discuss it outside privately? Murphy drained his glass and stood unsteadily. Lead the way, lady. Eleanor walked toward the back door, hearing Murphy's heavy footsteps behind her. They stepped into the alley where darkness pooled thick between buildings. So, Murphy said, what kind of work? Eleanor's knife slid between his ribs before he could finish the question. Precise thrust angled upward toward the heart. Murphy gasped and staggered backward. You want to know who I am? Eleanor twisted the blade. I'm Eleanor Blackwood. Marcus was my husband. Murphy's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth. Did Marcus call out my name when you killed him? Murphy managed one word. Please. Wrong answer. Eleanor withdrew the knife and let him fall. Murphy sprawled in the alley dirt, clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers. The others, Eleanor said, kneeling beside him. Where are they? I don't... Eleanor pressed the knife point against his throat. Thomas Blackwood, Dutch Cassidy, the rest of them. Where? Devil's Canyon. Murphy gasped. Old mine, north of Copper Creek. Thank you. Eleanor drew the blade across his throat in one smooth motion. Murphy's body went limp. She wiped her knife clean on his jacket and stood. In the distance, the piano still played its melancholy tune. No one had heard anything. No one would find the body until morning. The Phantom Lady walked back to her horse and rode into the night. Eleanor didn't return to the ranch immediately. Instead, she rode south to the abandoned cemetery outside Millbrook, a forgotten place where Confederate soldiers had been buried after a skirmish early in the war. Fitting location for what came next. She spent the morning digging a grave between two weathered headstones. Not for Murphy, his body would rot in that alley where it belonged. This grave was for someone else. When the hole was deep enough, Eleanor retrieved a canvas bundle from her saddlebags. Inside was a Confederate uniform jacket, complete with sergeant's stripes. She'd found it among Marcus's things after the funeral. She laid the jacket in the grave and covered it with earth. No headstone, no marker. Just another patch of disturbed ground in a place where disturbed ground was common. But she left one thing visible, Murphy's knife driven deep into the earth at the head of the grave. A message for anyone smart enough to read it. The Phantom Lady was awake. Eleanor was cleaning her weapons when Father Miguel arrived at the ranch. She heard his horse approaching and quickly covered her arsenal with a kitchen towel. The priest knocked gently. Mrs. Blackwood, it's Father Miguel. She opened the door with a smile. Father, what brings you out here? Miguel Santos was a small man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. He'd performed her wedding ceremony 5 years ago, had blessed their marriage in the little church in Millbrook. I heard about Marcus, he said quietly. I came to offer my condolences and to see if you needed anything. That's very kind. Eleanor stepped aside. Please come in. Miguel entered and glanced around the small room. If he noticed anything unusual, he didn't comment. How are you managing? This must be incredibly difficult. I'm surviving. Have you given thought to the funeral arrangements I buried him myself, on the hill. Miguel nodded slowly. I understand. Sometimes grief requires solitude. He paused. Eleanor, I hope you know that Marcus loved you very much. Whatever troubles you two might have had, that was real. Eleanor's smile never wavered. What troubles? I... Perhaps I shouldn't have. Miguel looked uncomfortable. It's just that Marcus came to see me a few weeks ago. He seemed troubled, conflicted about something. Did he say what? No. But he asked about forgiveness, about redemption, whether a man could ever truly escape his past. Miguel's eyes searched her face. He also asked about you, about the war, about what you'd done. Eleanor felt ice forming in her chest. What did you tell him? The truth, that you'd served your country with honor, that the war was over and both of you deserved peace. Miguel reached for her hand. Eleanor, whatever demons you faced during the war, God has forgiven you. Marcus understood that. Did he? Something in her tone made Miguel step back. Eleanor, she was quiet for a long moment, studying the priest's face. Kind eyes, honest face. A man who believed in redemption and second chances. A man who told Marcus about the Phantom Lady. Father, she said finally, do you believe in justice? Of course, but justice tempered with mercy, with forgiveness. What about when mercy enables more evil? What about when forgiveness becomes permission? Miguel frowned. I'm not sure I understand. Eleanor pulled away the kitchen towel, revealing her weapons. Miguel's eyes widened as he took in the guns, the knives, the ammunition. You told Marcus who I really was, she said quietly. You told him about the 37 men I killed. Eleanor, did you think he'd love me more or less? Miguel's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to Marcus? He was murdered by men who knew exactly where to find him, men who knew he'd be alone. Eleanor picked up her knife and tested the edge with her thumb. Someone told them his routines, someone who wanted the Phantom Lady to suffer. You can't possibly think You married us, Father. You knew we were happy, peaceful, and you decided that Marcus deserved to know the truth about his wife's bloody hands. Miguel backed toward the door. Eleanor, you're not thinking clearly. Grief can... I'm thinking very clearly, for the first time in 5 years. She moved between him and the door. Miguel pressed himself against the wall. The men who killed Marcus. Eleanor said, they carved words into his chest. This is what happens to traitors. They thought he'd betrayed them somehow, but Marcus never betrayed anyone except me. I don't understand. He was leaving me, planning to run away with another woman. But first he was going to confess everything. Tell me the truth about what you'd revealed. Eleanor smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Imagine how that conversation would have gone. Miguel crossed himself. You would have killed him. Probably, and his killer friends knew it. They just decided to do the job themselves. Eleanor's voice was conversational, almost friendly. Tell me, Father, was it justice or mercy? Eleanor, please. 37 men during the war. All soldiers, all armed, all trying to kill me first. She stepped closer. You want to make it 38? Miguel's lips moved in silent prayer. Eleanor watched him for a long moment, then stepped aside. Get out. The priest bolted for the door, stumbling in his haste. Eleanor listened to his horse galloping away, then returned to cleaning her weapons. She'd let Miguel live because killing a priest would bring unwanted attention. But she'd planted a seed of fear. When people started asking questions about missing outlaws, Father Miguel would remember this conversation. He'd remember that some sins required blood, not forgiveness. Eleanor spent her last night at the ranch sitting beside Marcus's grave. The moon was full, painting everything silver and black. In the distance, coyotes howled their ancient songs. I know you didn't love me, she said to the headstone. Maybe you never did. But you saved me from that life, and I'm grateful for that. Even if you only did it to ease your own conscience. Wind stirred the grass around the grave. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter. I could let this go, sell the ranch, move to Oregon like we planned. Start over again. She touched the wooden cross marking his burial site. But they carved you up like a Christmas goose, left you to rot in that creek. And they did it because they thought the Phantom Lady was dead. She stood and brushed dirt from her knees. Time to prove them wrong. Eleanor walked back to the house and gathered her remaining supplies. Food for a week on the trail, clean water, ammunition enough for a small war. everything else she left behind. At dawn, she set fire to the house. She watched from the hill as flames consumed 5 years of careful domesticity. The kitchen where she'd cooked Marcus's meals, the bedroom where they'd shared a bed if not their hearts, the sitting room where she'd mended his clothes and pretended to be someone else. The fire burned hot and fast. By noon, nothing remained but charred timbers and ash. Eleanor mounted her horse and rode north toward Devil's Canyon. Behind her, smoke rose like a funeral pyre. The Phantom Lady had come home. Devil's Canyon earned its name honestly. Twisted rock formations jutted from the earth like broken bones. Ancient caves pocked the cliff faces, some large enough to hide an army. The place felt cursed, abandoned, even by God. Perfect hideout for desperate men. Eleanor made camp 2 miles from the canyon mouth and studied the terrain through field glasses. Marcus's old Confederate field glasses scavenged from a dead Union officer at Bull Run. She could see smoke rising from somewhere deep in the canyon. Campfire, probably. Maybe more than one. Thomas and his remaining men feeling safe in their stone fortress. They'd killed Marcus 3 days ago. Plenty of time to reach this place and celebrate their victory. They probably thought Eleanor was still weeping over her husband's grave. Mistake. Eleanor waited until sunset, then began her approach. She moved carefully, using techniques learned during 5 years of stalking human prey. Avoid loose stones. Test each foothold. Never silhouette yourself against the sky. The Phantom Lady had infiltrated Confederate camps from Virginia to Tennessee. One outlaw hideout shouldn't pose much challenge. She reached the canyon floor as full darkness settled over the mountains. The campfire was visible now, flickering orange light dancing on stone walls. Voices carried clearly in the thin air. Eleanor crept closer, using boulders and shadows for cover. 20 yards from the fire, she could make out individual words. "Should have seen his face when I stuck him," someone was saying. "Looked like a surprised trout." Laughter. Male voices rough with whiskey and cruelty. What about the woman? Different voice. Worried. Murphy said she might come looking. Murphy's an idiot. This voice Eleanor recognized. Thomas Blackwood. Colder than Marcus, but with the same cadence. Eleanor's a farmer's wife. Probably doesn't even know how to load a gun. More laughter. Eleanor counted shadows around the fire. 4 men, Dutch Razor, Eddie Iron Sam, and Thomas, all present and accounted for. She retreated to a safe distance and began planning their deaths. Eleanor spent 2 days studying the outlaws' routines from her hidden camp. Thomas had chosen his stronghold. Devil's Canyon offered only 2 entrances, both easily defended. But the Phantom Lady had learned patience in a harder school than this. She watched Dutch Cassidy make his morning trek to the old mining equipment scattered throughout the canyon. The explosives expert was mapping something measuring distances between the abandoned powder magazines. Planning his next job, probably. Dutch moved like a man comfortable with death. Thick-set, methodical, careful around the old dynamite stores. He'd lost his left eye to a premature detonation during the war, and the scarred socket gave him a perpetually squinting expression. Eleanor had fought alongside men like Dutch, respected them even. They understood that explosives demanded respect, precision, absolute focus. One mistake meant obliteration. That respect would be his downfall. On the 3rd morning, Dutch followed his usual route to the northernmost powder magazine, a stone dugout carved into the canyon wall, where miners had once stored their blasting supplies. Eleanor had spent the previous night preparing her trap. She'd found the magazine exactly as she'd hoped, partially collapsed with wooden support beams, rotted from decades of weather. The remaining dynamite was old, unstable weeping, dangerous nitroglycerin. Dutch would approach carefully, professionally, just as she'd counted on. Eleanor waited in the shadows above the magazine entrance. Dutch appeared precisely at 8 o'clock, carrying his leather satchel of tools. He examined the wooden support frame, testing each beam for stability. "Careful, Dutch," Eleanor called softly. He spun toward her, voice hand dropping to his gun. "Who's there?" Eleanor stepped into view, her rifle trained on his chest. "Someone who knows what you did to Marcus Blackwood." Dutch's scarred face showed no emotion. "Lady, I think you got the wrong 17 stab wounds. You held him while Blackjack carved him up." "Prove it," Eleanor smiled. "I don't have to prove anything." I just have to kill you. Dutch's hand inched toward his pistol. Eleanor let him think he had a chance. You know what I like about explosives, Dutch. They're honest. No pretense, no lies. Just pure clean destruction. She gestured toward the magazine behind him. Tell me how much nitro is leaking from those old sticks. Dutch glanced over his shoulder, professional instinct overriding caution. The dynamite cases were indeed sweating dangerous yellow fluid. Enough to level half this canyon, he admitted. And what happens if I put a rifle bullet into that puddle? Dutch's face went pale. You'd kill us both. I've got nothing left to live for. Do you? For a moment they faced each other across 10 yards of empty air. Dutch was fast, Eleanor knew. Probably faster than she was now. 5 years of peaceful living had slowed her reflexes, but the Phantom Lady had never relied on speed alone. You want to know the truth about Marcus? Dutch said, desperation creeping into his voice. He was planning to betray us. Run off with some woman named Clara. Thomas was just protecting the gang. I know about Clara. Then you know Marcus was a lying snake who, Eleanor's shot took him center mass, spinning him around. Dutch staggered backward, clutching his chest, and fell against the unstable dynamite cases. The explosion lit up Devil's Canyon like the wrath of God. The blast brought the other 3 outlaws running. Eleanor watched from her concealed position as Thomas Razor Eddie and Iron Sam converged on the smoking crater where the powder magazine had been. Nothing remained of Dutch except scattered pieces and a lingering smell of sulfur. Jesus Christ, Razor Eddie whispered. What happened? Thomas knelt beside a chunk of scorched leather, all that remained of Dutch's satchel. His gray eyes, so much like Marcus's, showed no grief. Only calculation. Accident, he said finally. Dutch got careless with old dynamite. The hell he did. Iron Sam's voice was a low growl. Dutch was the most careful man I ever knew around explosives. Thomas stood brushing dust from his knees. Then what do you think happened, Sam? I think we got company. Eleanor had to admire Thomas's performance. He looked genuinely puzzled, scanning the canyon walls with apparent concern, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his gun. Marcus's twin knew exactly what had killed Dutch Cassidy. Spread out, Thomas ordered. Check every cave, every hiding spot. If someone's in our canyon, we find them. The 3 men began a systematic search, moving with the practiced coordination of experienced fighters. Eleanor retreated deeper into the maze of stone passages, leading them away from her actual camp. She had what she'd come for, confirmation that they suspected her presence. Now the real hunt could begin. The storm struck Devil's Canyon that evening with biblical fury. Rain hammered the stone walls, turning dry creek beds into torrents. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the mountains. Perfect hunting weather. Eleanor had tracked Razor Eddie to a shallow cave on the canyon's eastern wall. He'd taken shelter from the storm, building a small fire near the cave mouth. Smart positioning, he could see anyone approaching from the front, and the cave protected his back. But the Phantom Lady had learned to attack from unexpected angles. Eleanor climbed the cliff face above Eddie's cave, using handholds carved by wind and water. Rain made the stones slippery, treacherous. One mistake would send her plummeting onto the rocks below. She'd made similar climbs during the war, scaling Confederate positions at night, slipping into enemy camps like a ghost. Her hands remembered the techniques, even if her muscles protested the strain. At the cave's roof, she found what she was looking for, a natural chimney where rainwater had carved a narrow passage through the stone. Eleanor tied her rope around a boulder and lowered herself into the darkness. The rope ended 10 feet above the cave floor. Eleanor hung suspended, listening to Eddie moving around below. The storm masked any sound she might make. She let go. Eleanor landed in a crouch behind Eddie, who was adding wood to his fire. He sensed movement and started to turn, but her knife was already sliding between his ribs. For Marcus, she whispered. Eddie gasped and tried to pull away. Eleanor twisted the blade, angling upward toward his heart. You want to know something funny? She said, holding him upright as he weakened. Marcus was planning to leave me. Run away with another woman. Your gang did me a favor. Eddie's eyes widened. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth. But you made one mistake. You enjoyed killing him. You took your time, carved him up like a piece of meat. Eleanor's voice was conversational, almost friendly. That made it personal. She withdrew the knife and let Eddie collapse. He twitched once, then lay still. Eleanor wiped her blade clean and checked his pockets. Found a few dollars, some tobacco, and a small leather pouch containing what looked like finger bones. Trophies from previous victims. She scattered the bones across the cave floor and walked back into the storm. Thomas and Iron Sam found Eddie's body the next morning. Eleanor watched their discovery from a concealed position across the canyon using Marcus's field glasses to study their reactions. Iron Sam vomited. Thomas remained calm, examining the scene like a detective. Professional work, Thomas called to his remaining partner. Single thrust angled upward. Knew exactly where to strike. Who could do something like this? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried across the canyon with perfect clarity. Eleanor Blackwood, Marcus's widow. Sam's head snapped up. That's impossible. She's just a farmer's wife. No. Thomas stood, his face grim. She's the Phantom Lady. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Thomas knew, had always known. During the war, Thomas continued, the Phantom Lady killed 37 Confederate soldiers. Always alone. Always at night. They say she could walk through a camp of 100 men and none would hear her coming. You're talking about ghost stories. Ghost stories don't use knives. Thomas gestured toward Eddie's body. This is real, and she's hunting us. Sam looked around the canyon with new eyes, seeing potential death in every shadow. What do we do? We set a trap. Eleanor lowered the field glasses. Thomas was smarter than she'd given him credit for. More dangerous than Marcus had ever been. The hunt was about to become much more complicated. Eleanor was preparing to move her camp when she heard horses approaching Devil's Canyon. She grabbed her rifle and crept to an observation point overlooking the main entrance. Father Miguel rode into the canyon alone, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Thomas and Iron Sam emerged from cover with weapons drawn. Easy, boys, Miguel called. I come bearing information. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The priest had come to warn them. Thomas kept his gun trained on Miguel but gestured for him to dismount. You're a long way from your church, Padre. I bring word of Eleanor Blackwood. She visited me 3 days ago. And Miguel's voice carried clearly in the thin air. She's lost her mind. Grief has driven her insane. She threatened to kill me. Ibra, why would she do that? Because I told Marcus the truth about her past, about what she did during the war. Miguel's shoulders sagged. I thought he deserved to know. I thought it might help them both find peace. Thomas laughed bitterly. Peace. You told a man his wife was a killer and you expected peace. I expected forgiveness, understanding. Instead, Miguel gestured helplessly. She burned down their house, killed Jeremiah Murphy in Cedar Falls. Now she's hunting the rest of you. Eleanor felt the world spinning around her. Father Miguel hadn't just revealed her past to Marcus, he'd set up the entire chain of events that led to Marcus's death. Where is she now? Thomas asked. Somewhere in these canyons. She spoke of finding the men who killed her husband. You led her right to us. No, I came to warn you, to offer my help in stopping her before she kills again. Thomas studied the priest for a long moment. What kind of help? Miguel reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a familiar object, Eleanor's old war journal. The leather-bound book where she'd recorded every kill, every technique, every lesson learned in 5 years of sanctioned murder. She left this behind, Miguel said. Everything you need to know about how she thinks, how she fights, her methods, her weaknesses. Eleanor's hands tightened on her rifle. That journal contained the accumulated wisdom of the Phantom Lady. In the wrong hands, it was a roadmap to her destruction. Why help us? Iron Sam asked. We're outlaws. Because Eleanor Blackwood is no longer the woman Marcus married. She's become something else. Something that needs to be stopped. Miguel's voice was heavy with what sounded like genuine regret. I created this monster. It's my responsibility to destroy it. Thomas took the journal and flipped through its pages. Even at a distance, Eleanor could see his expression change as he read her carefully documented techniques. This is detailed, he said quietly. She was very thorough. 37 kills in 5 years, each one recorded like a scientific experiment. And you think this will help us kill her? Miguel nodded. Know your enemy. Isn't that what Sun Tzu said? Thomas snapped the journal shut. Padre, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Eleanor had heard enough. She slipped away from her observation point and returned to her hidden camp mine, racing with implications. Father Miguel hadn't just betrayed her past to Marcus. He'd orchestrated everything. The revelation that drove Marcus to plan his escape. The timing that led to his murder. Even her current hunt for vengeance. All of it designed to transform Eleanor Blackwood back into the Phantom Lady. But why Eleanor spent the rest of the day moving her camp and supplies to a new location deeper in the canyon system. As she worked, pieces of a larger puzzle began falling into place. Father Miguel had married her to Marcus 5 years ago, had blessed their union, encouraged their peaceful life. Why would he suddenly decide to destroy it, unless destroying it had always been the plan? That evening, she crept back toward Thomas's camp and positioned herself where she could observe their conversation. The three men sat around a small fire, passing a bottle of whiskey between them. Tell me about the war, Thomas was saying to Miguel. About what she really did. Miguel stared into the fire. You have to understand, during the war, both sides used special operatives, assassins, people who could slip behind enemy lines and eliminate specific targets. Spies. More than that, killers. The Union had several, but Eleanor was the most effective. They called her the Phantom Lady because Confederate soldiers started believing she was literally a ghost. How do you know all this? Miguel was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. Because I was her handler. Eleanor's blood froze. The priest continued speaking, but his words seemed to come from very far away. I wasn't always a priest. During the war, I worked for Union intelligence. My job was to recruit and manage assets behind Confederate lines. Miguel took a long pull from the whiskey bottle. Eleanor was my greatest success and my greatest failure. What do you mean? She was supposed to eliminate specific Confederate officers, surgical strikes to disrupt their command structure. But something went wrong. She started killing anyone in a gray uniform. Soldiers, officers, even drummers and messengers. Thomas leaned forward. 37 kills. That I know of. There may have been more. Miguel's voice was haunted. She became addicted to it. The killing. The power. I tried to extract her, bring her back to Union lines, but she refused. Said the war was the only place she felt alive. So what happened? The war ended. I lost track of her for a while, then heard she'd married some Confederate veteran and settled in Wyoming. I hoped she'd found peace. Eleanor wanted to scream, to put a bullet through Miguel's lying skull, but she forced herself to remain still to listen. Why seek her out after all these years? Iron Sam asked. Miguel sighed. Because I learned something about her husband, something that changed everything. What? Marcus Blackwood wasn't just any Confederate veteran. He was Captain Marcus Blackwood, 14th Virginia Infantry, the man who killed my brother at Fredericksburg. The pieces finally clicked into place. Eleanor saw the whole picture now laid out like a map of hell. You wanted revenge, Thomas said. I wanted justice. Marcus had built a new life, found happiness, while my brother rotted in an unmarked grave. So I decided to give Marcus a choice, face the truth about his wife's bloody past, or live with the knowledge that he'd married his enemy. You told him who she was. I told him everything. About the 37 kills, about how she butchered Confederate soldiers for sport, about how she was probably planning to kill him too once she got bored with domestic life. Eleanor bit her tongue to keep from crying out. Every word was a lie wrapped around a grain of truth. Marcus panicked, Miguel continued, started planning to run away with some woman named Clara. But first he wanted to confess everything to Eleanor, tell her he knew who she really was. Stupid, terrified, he knew what she was capable of, so he reached out to you, Thomas, asked for help disappearing. You convinced him to steal that gold shipment first to fund his new life. Thomas nodded slowly. And you made sure Eleanor would find out about Clara. I left Marcus's letter where she'd discover it. I knew it would drive her over the edge, transform her back into the Phantom Lady. Miguel's voice carried a note of satisfaction. I wanted her to suffer the way my brother suffered, the way I've suffered. And now, Now she's become the monster she always was. When this is over, when you've killed her, the world will be rid of the Phantom Lady forever. Eleanor had heard enough. She slipped away from the camp, her mind reeling with revelations. Miguel had orchestrated everything. Marcus's death, her transformation, even her current hunt for vengeance. All part of an elaborate plan to destroy both her and the man she loved. The priest thought he was playing chess with human lives. Time to show him that the Phantom Lady had always preferred a more direct approach. The next morning brought more bad news. Eleanor watched through her field glasses as a group of armed men rode into Devil's Canyon. 6 riders, all heavily armed, all moving with military precision. Miguel had brought reinforcements. Thomas greeted the newcomers, warmly shaking hands with their leader, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes. Even at a distance, Eleanor could see the authority in his bearing. Military, probably Union given Miguel's connections. She was outnumbered 10-1, now facing experienced soldiers in a canyon with limited escape routes. The smart move would be retreat. Find another time, another place to finish her hunt. But Eleanor was no longer thinking strategically. The revelations about Miguel's manipulation had awakened something darker than the Phantom Lady's professional precision. This had become personal in ways that went beyond Marcus's death. She spent the day studying the enlarged camp, noting guard rotations and defensive positions. The soldiers were good. They'd secured both canyon entrances and posted sentries on the high ground. But they'd made one mistake. They assumed the Phantom Lady would attack from outside the canyon. That evening, Eleanor began her final approach. Not toward the camp, but toward a specific location she'd identified during her reconnaissance, the old mine shaft, where the gang had been storing their supplies. If she was going to die in this canyon, she'd make sure to take as many of them with her as possible. The mine shaft descended 50 feet into the canyon floor, carved by optimistic prospectors who'd found more stone than gold. Thomas's gang had been using it as a storage depot, piling stolen goods and supplies in the abandoned tunnels, including several cases of dynamite salvaged from Dutch's collection. Eleanor lowered herself into the shaft using her rope, moving carefully in the absolute darkness. Her hands found the wooden ladder the miners had installed, though several rungs had rotted away over the years. At the bottom, she lit a small candle and surveyed her surroundings. The main tunnel stretched 30 yards before branching into smaller passages. Wooden support beams, old mining equipment, and the gang's stolen goods filled the available space, and there stacked against the far wall Dutch's remaining explosives. Eleanor examined the dynamite carefully. Most of it was old but stable. She selected 6 sticks and began preparing her charges, using techniques learned during the war. The Phantom Lady had sabotaged Confederate supply depots from Virginia to Georgia. One outlaw hideout shouldn't present much challenge. She placed charges at key structural points throughout the tunnel system, linking them with fuse cord in a pattern designed to bring down the entire mine. When detonated, the explosion would collapse the shaft and send tremors through the surrounding area, enough to bring down half the canyon walls. As she worked, Eleanor found herself thinking about Marcus. Not the lying, cheating Marcus who'd planned to abandon her, but the man who'd saved her from the war, who'd given her 5 years of something resembling peace. Had any of it been real, or had she simply been living another lie, as elaborate as Miguel's manipulation? Did it matter? Eleanor finished preparing her charges and climbed back toward the surface. Above, she could hear the murmur of voices from the main camp. Thomas and his new allies planning her destruction. Time to give them something more immediate to worry about. Eleanor emerged from the mine shaft just as the moon crested the canyon rim. Perfect timing, enough light to see, but enough shadows to hide. She crept toward the main camp, using every technique the Phantom Lady had mastered. Move with the wind, avoid loose stones. Keep low, keep quiet, keep deadly. The sentries were good, but they were watching for external threats. Eleanor approached from the one direction they couldn't see directly, through the center of their defensive perimeter. She reached the edge of their camp and counted targets. Thomas, Iron Sam, Miguel, and 6 soldiers. All armed, all dangerous, all about to die. Eleanor struck the match and lit the long fuse leading back toward the mine shaft. She had perhaps 3 minutes before the charges detonated. Time to make them count. Her first target was the nearest sentry, a young soldier who looked barely old enough to shave. Eleanor's knife took him in the kidney, a quick thrust that dropped him silently. She dragged his body behind a boulder and moved toward the next position. 2 minutes. The second sentry proved more alert. He turned as Eleanor approached, mouth opening to shout a warning. Her thrown knife caught him in the throat, cutting off the cry before it could form. But the motion had been visible from the main camp. Shouts erupted as the soldiers realized they were under attack. "There by the rocks!" Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes, lighting up the canyon like lightning. Eleanor rolled behind cover as bullets sparked off stone around her. 1 minute. "Fan out!" Thomas's voice rose above the shooting. "Find her!" Eleanor moved again, using the chaos to mask her approach. She put a bullet into Iron Sam's chest, spinning him around. The big man staggered but didn't fall, returning fire with his massive Colt. 30 seconds. More soldiers converged on her position. Eleanor retreated toward the mine shaft, drawing them after her. They followed eagerly, thinking they had her trapped. 10 seconds. Eleanor reached the shaft opening and dove for cover behind the wooden headframe. 5 seconds. The soldiers surrounded her position, rifles raised. "Got you now, you murdering bitch!" one of them shouted. Eleanor smiled and covered her ears. The mine shaft erupted like a volcano. The explosion shattered the night, sending rock and flame hundreds of feet into the air. The blast wave knocked men from their feet and brought down sections of the canyon wall. When the dust settled, Eleanor found herself alone among the dead and dying. The soldier who'd shouted at her lay 20 feet away, his body twisted at impossible angles. 2 others had been crushed by falling stones. A 4th writhed on the ground, both legs clearly broken. Eleanor picked up a discarded rifle and put him out of his misery. Thomas and Miguel had survived the blast, but both were injured. Thomas clutched a bloody arm while Miguel pressed his hand against a gash in his forehead. Iron Sam was nowhere to be seen, either dead under the rubble or fled into the darkness. Eleanor walked toward the 2 men who had orchestrated her husband's death. They watched her approach with the resignation of condemned prisoners. 38, she said conversationally. 39 if you count the boy with the broken legs. Thomas tried to reach for his gun with his good hand. Eleanor kicked it away. 39 kills, she continued. But you know what, I don't feel any different. Marcus is still dead. The last 5 years are still a lie. And tomorrow I'll still be alone. Eleanor, Miguel said weakly, this won't bring him back. No, but it'll stop you from destroying anyone else. She raised her rifle and put a bullet through Miguel's heart. The priest fell backward, his eyes staring sightlessly at the stars. Thomas watched his ally die without expression. You want to know the truth about Marcus? I know the truth. Do you know why he really married you? Eleanor kept her rifle trained on his chest but didn't fire. Tell me. Marcus didn't save you from anything. He was ordered to marry you, to keep you quiet about what you'd done during the war. Ordered by who? Thomas laughed, though it obviously caused him pain. By the same people who sent Miguel to manipulate you. This whole thing, your marriage, your peaceful life, even your revenge, it's all been planned from the beginning. Eleanor felt the world shifting around her again. You're lying. Am I? Why do you think Marcus kept that letter to Clara? Why leave evidence of his betrayal where you'd find it? Thomas's voice was growing weaker, but his eyes remained sharp. Because he wanted you to know the truth. Finally. What truth? That Marcus Blackwood has been dead for 5 years. The man you married was someone else entirely. Eleanor stared at him. That's impossible. Is it you said yourself that something felt wrong? That he seemed different? Thomas coughed, specking his lips with blood. The real Marcus Blackwood died at Fredericksburg. The man you married was Thomas Blackwood playing a role. You're Thomas. No, I'm Marcus. The real Marcus. I've been hunting my own imposter for years. Eleanor's rifle wavered. Nothing made sense anymore. The man you married, the man you loved, he was my twin brother Thomas. He stole my identity after the war, used it to disappear from his own crimes. Marcus's voice was fading, but his words cut like knives. You never knew me at all, Eleanor. You loved a lie wrapped around another lie. Eleanor lowered her rifle slowly. If you're really Marcus, then I'm the man whose death you've been avenging. And Thomas, the man you thought you loved, he's still out there somewhere. Marcus Blackwood closed his eyes and died with a smile on his face. Eleanor stood alone in the ruined canyon, surrounded by corpses and debris, trying to process revelations that shattered everything she thought she knew. The man she'd married had been Thomas. The man she just killed had been Marcus, and somewhere in the darkness, the real Thomas Blackwood was still alive. Eleanor sat beside Marcus's body until dawn, trying to piece together the fragments of her shattered world. The real Marcus Blackwood lay dead at her feet. The man she'd called husband for 5 years had been Thomas, his twin brother. A stranger wearing Marcus's face, sleeping in Marcus's bed, living Marcus's stolen life. How many times had she kissed those lying lips? How many nights had she shared her body with a man whose very name was a deception? The morning sun painted the canyon walls gold and red, like dried blood on ancient stone. Eleanor stood and walked among the corpses, searching for answers that would never come. Father Miguel's body told her nothing new. The soldiers were mercenaries judging by their equipment, professional killers hired to clean up loose ends. But Iron Sam was indeed gone, vanished into the maze of canyons that honeycombed this region. Eleanor found his blood trail leading away from the blast site, but it disappeared among the rocks. No matter. Sam was small prey compared to what she hunted now. Eleanor gathered supplies from the wreckage and began tracking the real Thomas Blackwood. Because if the dying Marcus had told the truth, Thomas was still alive somewhere, still wearing her husband's stolen identity like a mask. Eleanor followed Iron Sam's blood trail north through a series of interconnected canyons. The big man was hurt badly, but moving fast, desperate to escape the Phantom Lady's reach. She found him 2 hours after sunrise, collapsed beside a natural spring. His left arm hung useless, shattered by falling rock. Blood soaked his shirt from multiple wounds. Sam looked up as Eleanor approached, his face resigned. "Come to finish it." "Where is he?" "Who?" Eleanor pressed her knife against his throat. "Thomas Blackwood, the man who's been pretending to be my husband." Sam's eyes widened. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. The man who hired you to kill Marcus, who planned this whole charade. That was Thomas in the canyon. You killed him yourself." Eleanor increased pressure on the blade. "That was Marcus, the real Marcus. Now tell me where Thomas is hiding." Sam stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. It was a broken, painful sound. "You still don't get it, do you? Even now you don't understand. Explain it." "There was no Thomas, never was." Sam coughed, specking his lips with blood. "The man you married was Marcus Blackwood, the same Marcus who just died in that canyon." Eleanor's hand trembled. "That's impossible." "Is it? You want to know the truth? Your precious husband was playing both sides? Marcus and Thomas were the same person. He invented the twin brother story to cover his tracks." The knife slipped from Eleanor's fingers. "No. Marcus Blackwood was a Confederate deserter who stole his own dead brother's identity, created an elaborate fiction about having a twin, used it to disappear from the war, from his crimes, from everything." Sam's voice grew stronger as he spoke, fueled by the satisfaction of delivering a final blow. "The man you loved, the man you married, the man you just avenged, he was the same person who ordered his own death. Marcus, wanted out of the outlaw life, wanted to disappear again, so he arranged his own murder and planned to assume yet another identity." Eleanor sank to her knees beside the spring. Clara was going to be his new wife in his new life, but first he had to eliminate the only person who could expose him. "Me. You knew too much about his past, about the war, about his desertion, so he manipulated that priest into revealing your history, hoping you'd either kill yourself from shame or get yourself killed hunting his murderers." Sam's laugh turned into a coughing fit. When it subsided, his voice was barely a whisper. "Congratulations, Eleanor. You got your revenge. You killed the man who betrayed you. Problem is, he's also the man you loved." Eleanor stared at her reflection in the spring water. The Phantom Lady looked back, hollow-eyed and haunted. "Why tell me this? Because Marcus is dead and I'm dying. Because sometimes the truth is the cruelest weapon of all." Sam closed his eyes and stopped breathing. Eleanor knelt beside the spring for a long time, trying to process the magnitude of Marcus's deception. He'd played every angle, manipulated every player, orchestrated his own death to achieve his own rebirth. And she'd been his unwitting executioner. Eleanor made her way back to Devil's Canyon as the sun reached its zenith. The explosion had changed the landscape, bringing down sections of cliff face and filling the air with settling dust. She walked among the bodies again, studying Marcus's face with new eyes. Had there been signs, tells that might have revealed his deception? The scar on his left shoulder from Chancellorsville? Eleanor had kissed that scar 100 times, thinking it proof of his Confederate service. But deserters carried the same wounds as heroes. His knowledge of military tactics, his skill with weapons, his careful way of avoiding certain topics about the war. She'd attributed it all to trauma, to a veteran's reluctance to relive painful memories. Instead, it had been guilt. The guilt of a man who'd abandoned his unit, stolen his brother's identity, and built a new life on lies. Eleanor knelt beside Marcus's body and searched his pockets methodically. Found his wallet, his tobacco pouch, a folding knife she'd given him for his birthday, and hidden in a secret compartment of his belt, a small brass key. Eleanor studied the key in the afternoon light. It was old, ornate, marked with numbers she didn't recognize. The kind of key that opened safety deposit boxes or private vaults. Marcus's final secret waiting to be discovered. Eleanor reached the town of Copper Creek as evening painted the sky purple and gold. It was larger than Millbrook, prosperous enough to support a real bank with a real vault. The kind of place where a man might hide his most valuable secrets. The bank was closed, but Eleanor had learned patience in a harder school than locked doors. She waited in the shadows across the street until the last clerk departed, then approached the rear entrance. Picking locks was another skill the Phantom Lady had mastered during the war. Confederate payroll shipments rarely traveled unguarded, but their temporary storage facilities often relied on simple mechanical security. Eleanor worked the lock with delicate precision, feeling each tumbler click into place. The door opened with barely a whisper. Inside the bank was tomb quiet. Eleanor lit a small candle and made her way to the vault. Another lock, this one more complex. It took 20 minutes to defeat. The vault contained rows of safety deposit boxes, each numbered and secured with its own lock. Eleanor compared the numbers on Marcus's key until she found a matchbox 237. The key turned smoothly. Inside the box, bundles of cash, gold coins, and a leather portfolio tied with string. Eleanor opened the portfolio and found documents that made her blood run cold. Marriage certificates, 5 of them, each bearing Marcus Blackwood's signature and a different woman's name. Clara Hutchins was only the most recent. Eleanor studied the certificates by candlelight. Sarah Morrison married 1868, divorced 1869. Elizabeth Grant married 1870, widowed 1871. Maria Santos married 1872, divorced 1873. Catherine Wells married 1874, disappeared 1875. And Eleanor Blackwood married 1876. Beneath the certificates, newspaper clippings, obituaries, and missing person reports. Sarah Morrison had died in a house fire. Elizabeth Grant had taken her own life with poison. Maria Santos had vanished during a camping trip. Catherine Wells had simply disappeared one night, leaving behind only a bloodstained dress. At the bottom of the portfolio, a handwritten journal in Marcus's familiar script. The key to managing multiple wives is isolation. Each woman must believe she is the only one, that her husband's frequent absences are necessitated by business or family obligations. Sarah was too curious about my past. Elizabeth grew suspicious when I received mail addressed to other names. Maria began asking inconvenient questions about my finances. Catherine was different, more accepting, less inquisitive. I might have kept her longer, but she discovered my correspondence with Maria's family. Unfortunate but necessary. Eleanor presents new challenges. Her military background makes her naturally observant, but her guilt over wartime killing makes her crave domesticity. She wants to believe in our simple life together. This psychological need can be exploited indefinitely, provided I maintain the illusion of Marcus the reformed veteran. The priest Miguel has become a useful asset. His knowledge of Eleanor's past gives me leverage should she become problematic. If necessary, I can arrange for him to reveal her identity, forcing her to flee or eliminate herself through shame. Clara awaits my arrival in Silver Creek. Young, naive, eager to start a new life with her mysterious suitor, she will be easier to manage than Eleanor, requiring less elaborate deception. Note transfer remaining assets to Denver accounts before eliminating Eleanor. Her death should appear accidental or self-inflicted. The grieving widower narrative will generate sympathy and deflect suspicion. Eleanor set down the journal with shaking hands. Marcus hadn't just deceived her about his identity. He'd planned to murder her just as he'd murdered 4 other wives. She was meant to be number 5. Eleanor sat in the bank vault surrounded by evidence of her husband's monstrous nature. 5 wives. 5 women who trusted him, loved him, believed his lies. How many others had there been? How many more Clara Hutchinses were scattered across the territories, waiting for their mysterious suitor to arrive? The Marcus she'd loved had never existed. Not as a Confederate veteran, not as a reformed outlaw, not as a loving husband. He'd been a predator wearing human skin, a killer who specialized in the slow murder of trust. Eleanor thought about the night she'd found him by the creek. The 17 stab wounds, the blood pooled in a perfect circle, the message carved into his chest. This is what happens to traitors. Marcus hadn't been killed by his gang. He'd hired them to murder him publicly, dramatically, in a way that would transform Eleanor into the Phantom Lady once more. His death was meant to be the final act of manipulation, turning his wife into a killer who would either destroy herself seeking revenge or be destroyed by those she hunted. Either outcome served his purpose. Dead wives told no tales. But something had gone wrong. The gang members had decided to keep the money Marcus had paid them and eliminate him anyway. Thieves stealing from a thief. Eleanor laughed, though the sound held no humor. Marcus had been betrayed by his own betrayers. The manipulator manipulated. Justice of a sort. Eleanor emerged from the bank as midnight bells chimed across Copper Creek. She walked through empty streets to the telegraph office and composed a message. Clara Hutchins, Silver Creek stop. Marcus Blackwood dead stop. Advise caution stop friend. She paid the night operator and stepped back into the darkness. One more woman saved from Marcus's web, but the work wasn't finished. Eleanor mounted her horse and began the long ride back to Wyoming, to the ruins of her former life. She had unfinished business with the dead. The ranch house was ash and charred timbers now, but Marcus's grave remained intact on the hill. Eleanor dismounted and stood before the wooden cross marking his burial site. I know who you were, she said to the silent earth. I know what you did. To me, to them, to all of us. Wind stirred the grass around the grave. Eleanor pulled the cross from the ground and cast it aside. You don't deserve prayers. You don't deserve peace. She began to dig. The work took most of the night. Eleanor's hands blistered and bled, but she continued digging until her shovel struck wood. Marcus's simple pine coffin, hastily constructed and barely adequate. Eleanor pried off the lid and stared down at her husband's corpse. Death had not been kind to Marcus Blackwood. His face was bloated, discolored, barely recognizable, but the 17 stab wounds were still visible, dark gashes in putrefying flesh. Eleanor reached into the coffin and retrieved the blood-stained letter to Clara, still clutched in Marcus's skeletal fingers. She unfolded the paper carefully, reading the words by moonlight. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. The same lies, the same manipulation. Even in death, Marcus had been planning his next deception. Eleanor struck a match and set the letter ablaze. She watched it burn completely before dropping the ashes into the empty grave. No more lies, she whispered. She replaced the coffin lid and began filling the hole. But instead of restoring the grave, she covered it completely, erasing all trace of Marcus Blackwood's final resting place. Let the earth swallow him. Let his name be forgotten. When the work was finished, Eleanor stood on the hill and watched the sun rise over the ruins of her former life. The burned house, the empty barn, the unmarked patch of disturbed earth. Nothing left but ghosts and memories. Eleanor rode into Millbrook one last time as the town awakened to another ordinary day. She tied her horse outside the general store and walked down the main street, observing the simple lives of simple people. A woman pushing a baby carriage, 2 men discussing the weather, children playing in the street, the same scene she'd witnessed weeks ago when the hunt began. But everything had changed. Eleanor entered Murphy's general store and approached the counter. Jeremiah Murphy looked up from his ledger and smiled uncertainly. Mrs. Blackwood, I heard about the trouble up in Devil's Canyon. All those explosions and such. Yes, quite a disturbance. Murphy studied her face, noting changes he couldn't quite identify. The Eleanor Blackwood who'd bought ammunition and rope weeks ago had been a grieving widow. This woman was something else entirely. Will you be staying in the area? No, I'm moving on. Where to? Eleanor considered the question. Where did a woman go when everything she'd believed was revealed as lies? when the life she'd built was constructed on graves. "West," she said finally. "California, maybe. Somewhere no one knows my name." Murphy nodded. "Fresh start. That's good. That's healthy." Eleanor almost smiled at his choice of words. Healthy, as if 5 years of marriage to a serial killer could be cured by a change of scenery. "I need supplies for the trail, food, water, ammunition. Planning to do more hunting." This time Eleanor did smile, and Murphy stepped back involuntarily. "There are always predators on the frontier, Mr. Murphy. A woman alone needs to be prepared." She paid for her supplies and walked out without another word. Behind her, Murphy crossed himself and began to pray. Getting to be a habit with these men. Eleanor waited at the stage depot as the westbound coach prepared for departure. Other passengers milled about a traveling salesman with sample cases, a young couple heading to California, an elderly woman visiting family in San Francisco. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. The kind of people Eleanor would never be again. The stage driver loaded luggage while passengers found their seats. Eleanor climbed aboard and settled by the window, watching Millbrook recede as they rolled out of town. Goodbye to 5 years of careful domesticity. Goodbye to Eleanor Blackwood, the farmer's wife. Goodbye to illusions of peace and redemption. "Where you headed, miss?" asked the traveling salesman. Eleanor turned from the window. "As far as this stage will take me." "Running from something, running to something." The salesman nodded knowingly. "Fresh start. I understand completely. The frontier is full of people reinventing themselves." Eleanor studied his friendly face. Honest eyes, soft hands, wedding ring on his finger. Probably had a wife and children waiting for him somewhere, trusting him to return safely from his business trips. What secrets was he carrying? What lies had he told to build his respectable life? "What's your business?" she asked. "Patent medicines, tonics and remedies for whatever ails you." He opened his sample case, revealing rows of small bottles. "Got something for every complaint. Headaches, stomach troubles, female difficulties, you name it." Eleanor examined the bottles. "Anything for a broken heart. Laudanum's good for emotional distress. Takes the edge off grief and regret." He handed her a small brown bottle. "This one's particularly effective." Eleanor read the label. The main ingredient was opium, enough to kill a grown man if taken in sufficient quantity. She thought about Marcus's other wives. Sarah, Elizabeth, Maria Catherine. Had they discovered the truth about their husband? Had they faced the same shattering revelation that had destroyed Eleanor's world? "How much? What, $5? But for a lady in distress, call it 3. Eleanor counted out the money and slipped the bottle into her coat pocket. "Thank you," the salesman smiled. "My pleasure. Hope it helps." Outside the stage windows, Wyoming territory rolled past in all its harsh beauty. Purple mountains, endless sky, wind-carved stone. A land where people disappeared without explanation, where the past could be buried as deep as a man was willing to dig. Perfect country for ghosts. The stage reached Silver Creek at sunset, and Eleanor disembarked with her few possessions. The town was smaller than Millbrook, newer, with the raw energy of a settlement still finding its identity. Eleanor found the hotel and secured a room on the second floor overlooking the main street. From her window, she could see the entire town, saloon shops, the railroad depot, where hopeful souls arrived daily to start new lives, including Clara Hutchins. Eleanor spotted her at the depot the next morning, a young woman with auburn hair and hopeful eyes. She wore a traveling dress and carried a small valise, clearly prepared for a long journey. Clara was waiting for a man who would never come. Eleanor watched from her window as Clara waited and waited. Hours passed. The westbound train came and went. Still, Clara remained checking her pocket watch, scanning the crowd for Marcus's familiar face. By evening, worry had replaced hope. Clara approached the station master, gesturing animatedly. Eleanor couldn't hear the conversation, but the woman's distress was obvious. The station master shook his head. No messages, no telegrams, no word from Marcus Blackwood. Clara found lodging in the same hotel where Eleanor was staying. Their rooms were on the same floor, separated by thin walls and thinner circumstances. That night, Eleanor heard Clara crying. Eleanor encountered Clara at breakfast the next morning. The younger woman sat alone at a corner table, picking at her food, while reading a letter she'd obviously memorized. "Miss Hutchins?" Clara looked up, surprised. "Yes. I'm Eleanor Shaw. I couldn't help noticing you seemed distressed. Eleanor had chosen a false name automatically, though the deception felt strange after so many revelations about identity and truth. I'm waiting for someone, Clara said. He was supposed to meet me yesterday, but he didn't arrive. Clara nodded, tears threatening. Marcus is always punctual. Something must have happened. Eleanor sat across from her. May I ask about this Marcus? Marcus Blackwood. We were going to be married. He wrote that he'd finished his business in Wyoming and was ready to start our new life together. Clara showed Eleanor the letter. Marcus's handwriting. Marcus's lies, Marcus's false promises. He sounds wonderful, Eleanor said carefully. He is. Clara's voice cracked. I don't understand what could have gone wrong. Eleanor studied the young woman's face. Pretty trusting, naive. Everything Marcus preferred in his victims. How did you meet? Through a mutual friend. Father Miguel Santos introduced us. Clara's face brightened slightly. Father Miguel said Marcus was a war hero looking for a fresh start, a good man who deserved happiness. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Miguel had been recruiting Marcus's victims, providing him with targets. How many priests were involved in this conspiracy? How many churches served as hunting grounds for predators? This Father Miguel, Eleanor said slowly. Is he local? No, he travels extensively. Missionary work, he calls it, bringing comfort to isolated communities. Clara's expression grew wistful. He has such a gift for understanding people's needs, understanding and exploiting them. Eleanor excused herself and returned to her room, mind racing with implications. Miguel hadn't just been Eleanor's handler during the war, or Marcus's partner in crime. He'd been actively recruiting victims for a serial killer. The priest was the spider at the center of the web, and if Miguel had introduced Clara to Marcus, there would be others. More Claras waiting in other towns, other churches, other carefully orchestrated meetings. Eleanor made her decision. Eleanor spent the next 3 days learning everything she could about Father Miguel's activities. She visited churches throughout the region, speaking with priests and parishioners about the traveling missionary. The picture that emerged was horrifying. Miguel traveled a circuit that covered 3 territories, visiting isolated communities where record-keeping was poor and people asked few questions. He identified vulnerable women, widows, spinsters, anyone desperate enough to believe in sudden romance. Then he introduced them to Marcus Blackwood. Eleanor found evidence of at least a dozen such introductions over the past 10 years. Women who'd met their mysterious suitor through Father Miguel's good offices, who'd planned new lives with their war hero fiancé. Most had simply disappeared. Eleanor returned to Silver Creek with a list of names and locations. Clara was still waiting at the depot, still checking for messages that would never come. Any word? Eleanor asked. Clara shook her head. Nothing. I've sent telegrams to every town between here and Wyoming. No one has seen him. Perhaps you should consider returning home. I can't. I sold everything to come here. Spent my savings on the train ticket and traveling clothes. Clara's voice was small, defeated. I have nowhere else to go. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar emotion, protectiveness. This woman was everything Eleanor had never been: innocent, trusting, hopeful. Everything Marcus and Miguel had sought to destroy. Clara, I need to tell you something about Marcus Blackwood. The younger woman looked up with desperate eyes. You know him? Yes, and I know why he didn't meet you. Eleanor sat beside Clara and began to speak. She told her about Marcus's true nature, about his other wives, about the pattern of seduction and murder that had claimed so many victims. Clara listened in growing horror, her face draining of color. That's impossible. Marcus loves me. He wrote such beautiful letters. Eleanor showed her the marriage certificates she'd taken from the bank vault. Clara's name wasn't among them yet, but others were. Women who'd received the same beautiful letters, the same promises, the same lies. Father Miguel, Clara whispered, was recruiting victims. You weren't meant to be Marcus's wife, Clara. You were meant to be his next murder. Clara collapsed against Eleanor, sobbing. Eleanor held her, awkwardly uncertain how to offer comfort. The phantom lady had never learned maternal instincts, but something in Clara's broken trust awakened protective fury in Eleanor's chest. This woman represented every victim Eleanor had failed to save, every innocent destroyed by the conspiracy she'd unknowingly married into. Marcus was dead, but Miguel was still alive, still traveling his circuit, still introducing vulnerable women to phantom suitors. Time to end his ministry permanently. Eleanor spent a week planning Miguel's death. The priest was scheduled to visit the town of Cedar Falls in 10 days, conducting his usual rounds of confession and spiritual guidance and victim recruitment. Eleanor left Clara with enough money to return home and start over. The younger woman tried to thank her, but Eleanor cut her off. Forget Marcus Blackwood. Forget Father Miguel. Forget this ever happened. Shidwa, what about you? What will you do? Eleanor adjusted her gun belt. I have one more ghost to lay to rest. She rode north through familiar territory, retracing routes she'd traveled during her hunt for Marcus's killers. The landscape looked different now, charged with new meaning. Every rock formation might hide another of Miguel's victims. Every abandoned homestead might mark another woman's disappearance. How many graves dotted this wilderness? How many bones lay scattered in hidden canyons? Eleanor reached Cedar Falls 2 days before Miguel's scheduled arrival. She took a room at the Broken Wheel, the same saloon where she'd killed Blackjack Murphy weeks earlier. Full circle. The bartender recognized her, though he couldn't quite place where they'd met. Eleanor encouraged his confusion with careful misdirection. You look familiar, miss. You've been through here before. I have one of those faces. People always think they know me. She spent the intervening days studying the town's layout and Miguel's probable routes. The priest would arrive by stage, proceed directly to the church, conduct services and private meetings for 3 days, then depart for his next destination. Standard routine for a traveling missionary. Eleanor planned to interrupt that routine permanently. Father Miguel arrived on schedule, stepping down from the westbound stage with his familiar black valise and benevolent smile. Eleanor watched from the saloon window as he greeted the local priest and walked toward the church. Older now, grayer, but still carrying himself with the authority of someone accustomed to being trusted. Eleanor waited until evening before approaching the church. Services had ended, and the building was empty, except for Miguel, who knelt before the altar in apparent prayer. Perfect. Eleanor entered through the side door, her footsteps echoing in the vaulted space. Miguel looked up as she approached, and recognition dawned in his eyes. Eleanor Blackwood, I heard you were dead. Close, but not quite. Miguel rose slowly, his hand moving towards something concealed beneath his cassock. Eleanor's gun was already in her hand. I wouldn't. The priest froze. You've changed. I've learned the truth. About you, about Marcus, about everything. What truth is that? Eleanor gestured toward the altar. Kneel. Eleanor, kneel like you're praying. Miguel lowered himself to the floor, hands clasped before him. The picture of penitence. You've been recruiting women for Marcus to kill, Eleanor said. For years. How many died because of your introductions? I don't know what you mean. Eleanor pressed her gun barrel against the back of his skull. I found his records. 12 women over 10 years, all introduced by you. Marcus acted alone. I had no knowledge of his intentions. Liar. Eleanor pulled the hammer back on her Colt. The metallic click echoed through the church. Marcus paid you, she continued, a percentage of whatever he stole from his victims. You provided fresh prey, he provided fresh income. Miguel's shoulders sagged. You don't understand the pressures of missionary work. The constant travel, the poverty, the thankless service to ungrateful people. So you decided to supplement your income with murder. I never killed anyone. You delivered lambs to the slaughter. Same thing. Eleanor thought about Clara, about the other women whose names appeared in Marcus's files. Young, hopeful, trusting. Everything predators preferred. Did you enjoy it, watching them fall in love with your phantom suitor? Miguel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. They were so eager to believe, so desperate for love that they ignored obvious warning signs. I told myself I was providing them with excitement, romance, purpose. You were providing them with death. Not always. Some escaped before Marcus could complete his work. Eleanor thought about the missing women, the ones who'd simply vanished without explanation. Had they escaped, or had their bodies simply never been found? Why tell Marcus about my past? Because you were different, dangerous. Marcus needed leverage to control you, or eliminate me. Miguel nodded reluctantly. He was growing tired of maintaining the deception. Your marriage was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to access your war savings and disappear. But it lasted 5 years. You adapted better than expected, became truly domestic. Marcus found that unsettling. Eleanor laughed bitterly. I threatened his worldview, the idea that people could actually change. Marcus believed people were fundamentally predators, that civilization was just a thin veneer over animal nature. What do you believe? Miguel turned to look at her, and Eleanor saw genuine anguish in his eyes. I believed in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that even the worst sinners could find salvation. Past tense. Present tense. I still believe it. Even about you. Eleanor studied his face. You think I can be saved? I think you can choose to stop, to walk away from this path before it destroys what's left of your humanity. What humanity? I'm a killer, Miguel. Always have been. The war just gave me an excuse to indulge my nature. That's not true. Isn't it 37 men during the war? 5 more in the past month. Soon to be 6. Eleanor pressed the gun harder against Miguel's skull. Any last words, Father? Miguel closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Eleanor. For all of it. For what I did to you, to Marcus, to those women. I thought I was serving a greater purpose, but I was just feeding my own greed. Apology accepted. Eleanor pulled the trigger. Miguel's body slumped forward across the altar steps, blood pooling on holy ground. Eleanor stood over him for a moment, feeling nothing but emptiness. No satisfaction, no sense of justice served, just the hollow echo of one more life extinguished. She walked to the church doors and stepped into the night. Behind her, Father Miguel's blood seeped into wood worn smooth by countless penitents. How fitting. Eleanor mounted her horse and rode out of Cedar Falls without looking back. The town slept peacefully, unaware that their visiting priest lay dead in their sanctuary. By morning, she was miles away, following trails that led nowhere in particular. West toward California, toward the ocean, toward whatever came after revenge. Eleanor traveled for days without destination, following whatever road presented itself. She avoided towns when possible, camping in wilderness areas where silence was broken only by wind and wildlife. The frontier was vast, empty, indifferent to human suffering. Perfect place for someone with blood on her hands. She thought about Clara, often wondering if the young woman had made it home safely. Had she heeded Eleanor's advice to forget everything? Or would she spend her life looking over her shoulder, waiting for phantom suitors to emerge from shadows? Eleanor hoped for the former, but expected the latter. Trust once shattered, never fully healed. Near the California border, Eleanor encountered a wagon train, preparing for the final push through mountain passes. Families heading west with everything they owned packed into canvas-covered wagons. The wagon master was a grizzled veteran named Henderson, who looked Eleanor over with experienced eyes. Traveling alone, miss? Yes. Dangerous country ahead. Indians, bandits, weather. Safer to travel with others. Eleanor considered the offer. Company would provide protection, but it would also mean conversation questions, the constant effort of maintaining a false identity. She'd grown tired of lies. Thank you, but I prefer solitude. Henderson nodded. Your choice. But if you change your mind, we'll be moving slow through Devil's Pass. Catch up if you want. Eleanor watched the wagon train lumber westward, families and children pursuing dreams of better lives. Simple people living simple lives, just as she'd once tried to do. That life was closed to her now. The phantom lady could never truly disappear, never truly rest. There would always be another predator, another victim, another choice between justice and mercy. She turned south toward Mexico, toward a land where questions were rarely asked and the past could be buried as deep as a woman was willing to dig. The mountain town clung to steep slopes like a cluster of wooden birds' nests. Adobe and timber buildings cascaded down the hillside toward a valley where morning mist rose from a clear stream. Eleanor had found the place by accident, following a trail that led nowhere in particular. The townspeople called it Valle de las Flores, Valley of Flowers, though the growing season was too short for much cultivation. They called her simply La Sombra, the shadow. Eleanor sold flowers in the plaza outside the old mission church. Simple arrangements picked from wild meadows above the town. The local priest, Father Antonio, was elderly and kind with no knowledge of distant wars or phantom ladies. He saw only a quiet woman who spoke little but worked hard. "You have gentle hands," he told her one morning as she arranged marigolds near the church steps. "Hands that create beauty." Eleanor studied her fingers, the same hands that had killed Miguel Marcus and so many others. Could hands that dealt death also nurture life? "Sometimes," she said carefully. "Always," Father Antonio corrected. "It is a choice we make each day, beauty or ugliness, creation or destruction." Eleanor thought about this as she worked. The old priest made it sound simple, but Eleanor had learned that life was never simple. When children asked her name, she told them she was just a shadow passing through. Most accepted this answer with the easy adaptability of youth, but one child, a girl of perhaps 8 years, persisted in her questions. "Shadows come from people," Maria insisted. "What person do you come from?" Eleanor considered various lies, then settled on something approaching truth. "Someone who used to exist, but she's gone now." Where did she go? Into the mountains, into the past, into stories people tell to frighten children. Maria wrinkled her nose. "That's silly. People don't disappear." "Don't they?" Eleanor finished arranging her flowers and walked away, leaving the child to contemplate questions that had no easy answers. Eleanor was tending her small garden behind the rented room when the letter arrived. The postal rider had climbed the mountain trail specifically to deliver it, which meant the sender had paid considerable expense to ensure delivery. Eleanor's name and location were written in careful script she didn't recognize. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "Dear Mrs. Shaw, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Clara Hutchins, though you may remember me by my maiden name. I have recently married a kind man who knows nothing of my previous misfortunes, and we are very happy. I am writing to thank you for saving my life in Silver Creek. Without your intervention, I would certainly have become another of Marcus Blackwood's victims. Your courage gave me the chance to start over to find real love with someone worthy of trust. I have also been researching Father Miguel's activities, and I believe there may be other women who escaped his network. I am attempting to contact them to offer support and resources for rebuilding their lives. I know you believe you are a monster, but you are wrong. A monster would have left me waiting at that depot until Marcus arrived to claim me. A monster would not have cared about the fate of a foolish young woman. You saved me. You saved others by stopping Miguel. You are not the Phantom Lady anymore, no matter what you tell yourself. I hope you find peace in whatever valley you have chosen for your new life." With eternal gratitude, Clara Hutchins Morrison Eleanor read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in her wooden box with other precious things. Clara was wrong, of course. The Phantom Lady would never truly die, would always be there waiting beneath the surface, ready to emerge when darkness threatened innocence. But perhaps that wasn't entirely bad. Perhaps the world needed phantoms, shadows that moved between the light and dark, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Eleanor looked out at Valle de las Flores, at the simple people living simple lives. Children played in the plaza, while their mothers gossiped by the fountain. Old men dozed in the afternoon sun. Father Antonio rang the mission bells, calling the faithful to evening prayers. Peace. The kind of peace Marcus had promised but never delivered. Eleanor touched the scar on her throat, barely visible now, faded to a thin white line. A reminder of battles fought and survived. She had found something here in the mountains. Not redemption, perhaps, but a kind of quiet acceptance. The Phantom Lady could rest, but she would never truly sleep. Eleanor closed her eyes and listened to the mission bells ring across the valley, calling the faithful home.